Okay, so first and foremost, let's go through what is guilt. We've got a definition there, and it's slightly hidden, so I will just tell you what it says. Guilt has been identified as a feeling of remorse or responsibility, harmful attitude or behaviors. Okay, so shame and guilt are emotions that everyone, everywhere experiences. Within our context of addiction, it can fuel the disease and as they are unwanted and uncomfortable emotions. Even within family and friends and loved ones, you can feel guilt and shame, feeling that disappointed, being disappointed, or being disappointing, the feeling of being let down or self conscious. Uh, as I've already gone through the definition of guilt as it's put forward, I have also added two visual representations of guilt. Okay, the first one on the left-hand side emphasizes the all-consuming nature of guilt, and the second one has more of the all-consuming. As you can see, there's that build-up and kind of that feeling of being chased and what one can experience when feeling guilt. Okay, there's also some definitions in there of regret and shame and doubt, paranoia, anxiety, loathing, despair, fear, and frustration. So guilt is, although it's that one feeling that you can feel, it comes along with a bunch of other emotions. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Okay, then we've got shame. So now when we look at shame, shame is making that shift onto self. Okay, so going back to just what I said on guilt, guilt is more of the behavioral side of things. It's more of the action side of things, whereas shame is the opinion of self, feeling like a failure or feeling inferior. Okay, I have again included two visual representations. We have on the left-hand side a person pointing in quite an accusatory manner. And then the second one is a hand covering the face to hide themselves from themselves, as well as hiding themselves from other people. Okay, so giving the two different feelings of the guilt is the external side of things, the behavioral things, whereas shame is more the internal, what we impose upon ourselves. All right. Luto, so far, do you have anything to add on to the guilt and shame definitions that we've put forth?
I think you've highlighted the differences, the important differences between guilt and shame. So guilt is having done a feeling that you get when you have done something wrong. So it's largely tied to a behavior, whereas shame is more of self-concept in terms of the negative self-view that you have on yourself. And I think we're going to touch upon it a little later on in terms of where sometimes shame stems from, but it does sort of happens irrespective sometimes of a specific behavior or event. So just also noting the differences between the two as well.
Yeah. Okay. So now we're moving forward to who exactly experiences guilt and shame. Oh, can you go back a few more slides there?
Sorry, I'm not sure what I did.
It's okay.
Is that right?
No. The who experiences guilt and shame. So it's a few slides before. Yes, thank you. Okay, so this seems quite obvious, but still needs to be said. With the loved ones that are in treatment, they are able to address the shame and the guilt that they have experienced and that they feel, and they're able to process that in a therapeutic space. Whereas with family and loved ones, it's not always the case. It might even be difficult to see the extent of the guilt and the shame that one is feeling. So in terms of who experiences the guilt and shame, it's everyone. And where does the teachings of guilt and shame come from? It comes from past experiences. It comes from learned behaviors. It comes from teachings in school, teachings from when you're a youth, of what is right and what is wrong, what is bad and what is good. When you do something bad and you know it's bad, then you feel guilty about doing that, and that guilt can extend to feeling like a bad person for having done that. And I mean, with the loved ones in treatment, there have been some bad things done. Life has happened, experiences have been had, and for family members, you too have experienced the guilt and shame, and in different forms. It might not be as clear cut uh, as the loved ones in treatment, as they abused the substances and did bad. Whereas family, it's difficult to associate the actions of trying to do right by your loved ones. It could be in a space of enabling, because of guilt and shame. It could be a space of trying to set up boundaries and feeling guilty and shameful about setting up your boundaries. So it can work from both sides. It can be that negative. Apologies, I've got lightning on my side and thunder. Or it could be from a good space of trying to protect yourself. So just talking a little bit more on the guilt and shame, and the image I've put forth here, showing the impact of guilt and shame on the person. Again, we've got the weighing of emotions, we've got the all-consuming nature of guilt and wanting to hide yourself, because of the shame you feel, in the belief of you are bad. So in a nutshell, when we look at guilt, um, it's that I've done something bad, the behavior, the action that Luto had mentioned as well, versus shame of I am bad, focusing again on self. And as loved ones, we can experience guilt when sending a loved one off to treatment. And as I said before, setting up boundaries. I've made a mistake. Am I doing the right thing? Those are some of the questions that can come up with guilt, because those are the actions. You've set up a boundary. You've sent your loved one off to treatment. Are you doing the right thing? Uh, it's easy to start questioning yourself because of the decisions that you're making. And then on the shame side of things is, am I a bad parent? Am I a bad sister? Am I a failure because of the experiences that have led up to the point of sending your loved one off to treatment? Or finally coming to terms with the fact that addiction is a family disease. It's not just the individual that needs the help. It's the whole family that needs help. Everyone is experiencing various emotions. Everyone has had their lives turned upside down in some kind of way. All right, so we can move on to the family dynamics in guilt and shame. So this is a little bit of what guilt and shame looks like, at home. And when I say family dynamics here, I'm extending that to all loved ones, living with persons in addiction. So it's not just the family, friends, colleagues, even, bosses, the whole lot. So here we have that it's not just about the person that is in treatment. Okay, the anger outbursts are not just coming from one side. As family and loved ones, there can be angry outbursts because of what you're experiencing. And it could be as a result of the actions that you've had to put into place, whether it's from the treatment side of things or the enabling side of things. Then there's the overspending of money. Now, overspending of money to hide what's happening in the family, to make it seem like everything is all right, keeping up with the Joneses, trying to keep keep a front that no, the family, the unit is okay, everything is okay. This is not happening in my household. This is not happening in my friendship group. And this overspending of money can go towards treatment, and that's on the flip side of guilt and shame, of the good actions being taken there. And whether or not that money going to treatment is being utilized the way we obviously would hope for it to be. Addiction is so complicated. It's not as simple as this person's going to come into treatment and everything is going to be okay. They're going to do right by you. That's the hope. And that's going to continue to be the hope. And it may take a few rounds before that actually sticks. People are complicated. Life is complicated. It's not as simple as we'd like for it to be. Then the increasing the frequency or intensity of substance use. And this is for the loved one. The guilt and shame, as I touched on earlier, can perpetuate the cycle of addiction and substance use. I did something bad, I must be bad, so I must use or drink to make myself feel better. But then you're back at square one of I've done something bad, I am bad, and keeps going around and around and around. And for family or loved ones, it could be as a way to shield yourself from the guilt and shame, where you yourself may turn to an unhealthy coping mechanism. So yes, it says substance use there, but I wanted to focus more on the unhealthy coping mechanisms. No longer taking care of oneself, no longer setting up boundaries for yourself, trying to hide what's happening because it's you feel shame, you feel guilt about what's unfolded. Then we've got engaging in intense and unhealthy relationships. This could be with the loved one that needs the direct help. I'm going to look at it as direct help and indirect because, again, it's a family disease. Trying to make things better by enabling, therefore making the relationship worse than you intend for it to be. And not standing up for what you need is also unhealthy for oneself, because this is now when you stop taking care of yourself. And self-care, I do another lecture on self-care, and it covers a different multitude of things. It's not just the physical self-care that we know of, making sure you take a bath, taking your medication and all of that. It's also the emotional self-care, it's the mental self-care, and it's the spiritual self-care. All of that starts to fall away because of the all-consuming nature of guilt and shame as depicted in the previous images shown. Then we have poor recovery outcomes. Your loved one is in treatment. They are undergoing their process. If you do not undergo your own process of working through that guilt and shame, when your loved one comes out of treatment, you're going to have your baggage, they're going to have their baggage. And at some point, if both parties are not taking care of themselves, not working through their own recovery, then there's going to be an imbalance. And then we're going to be back at square one, whether it's for the direct addict or the affected loved one. Holding on to resentments, holding on to difficult memories in a way that it starts to fester in the life that you're trying to build going forward. And mental health issues, and this can go from anywhere. It can be depression, it can be anxiety, it can be all sorts of other mental issues that can be associated with poor self-care, poor mental health care, and all of that. I don't know if there's anything I need to touch on there, Luto, before we move on.
Yes, especially just under mental health issues. Yes. I think it's very important to sort of, since your loved one is in recovery as well, also it's your process of healing and potentially getting to know yourself outside of your loved one due to the journey. Sorry, there's also lightning on my side. Potentially your own sort of process of self-discovery as well, with regards to identifying guilt and shame, with regards to yourself as well. Because potentially, if we sort of stay in the guilt and shame sort of period, or stay in the guilt and shame sort of feelings, a lot of depressive episodes can come about, a lot of anxiety can come about, and at the same time, you don't want to sort of perpetuate those sort of issues as well. So I think starting a journey with regards to identifying the guilt and shame sometimes with regards to potential mental health issues.
Okay, sorry, I'm trying to use the mic, but it's not working. Okay, so next moving on to the breaking the cycle. All right. Okay, so here we've got a chart on the 4 components of breaking the cycle of shame. And it's focused specifically on shame because guilt provides an opportunity for learning. Because it's very action based, so it's something that can be quite easily taken care of. Because I mean, if you've done something that makes you feel guilty, one tends to not do that. Whereas the shame is very internal, and it can be difficult to break that internal struggle of your sense of self. And that's why this slide is specific to shame. So first and foremost, we've got practicing mindfulness. Now, what mindfulness is a wonderful technique to bring you back to the here and now. It helps one gain perspective on what's happening, and it falls in line with the practice of living just for today. When looking at mindfulness, you can work through the emotion as well as the experience, and you're able to observe your thoughts and behaviors without judgment, and by using challenging of negative thinking. The wonderful thing about challenging negative thinking or negative thoughts is it helps you gain perspective. So there's a few questions you can ask yourself of, is what I'm experiencing, is it fact or is it fiction? Is it based on emotion or is it based on what's truly happening around us? If I brought this to someone else that I trust, what would their opinion be on the matter? What is the worst case scenario, and what's the likelihood of that worst case scenario? And should the worst case scenario actually come into effect, will it happen? Will it matter today? Will it matter in 5 years? Will it matter in 10 years? So that's one of the ways of practicing mindfulness, just to kind of bring you back to the here and now. And then there's various techniques with mindfulness. There's mindful meditation. There's you can use journaling. You can use mindful walking or exercise. So different techniques to just kind of bring you to what's happening around you in that moment. Then next we've got identifying triggers. When identifying the triggers, it requires a bit of reflecting. Because when you're feeling that sense of shame within yourself, what is bringing about that shame? Okay, when was the last time I felt this way? That helps you track back what are the things that make you feel the shame that you are feeling. Is it when I make a specific type of decision? Is it when I engage with a particular person because of the feedback that I receive from that person? So it's very individualized in terms of identifying the triggers. I mean, what might trigger my own shame may differ from what triggers luto shame and vice versa. Then we've got reframing thoughts. So when reframing the thoughts, it works quite hand in hand with challenging negative thinking. As mentioned a few times, shame is internalized guilt of I am bad versus I have done something bad. And it's the most prevalent in a self-destructive behavior. When reframing one's thoughts, you are redirecting to practice or action, which allows for growth and allows for learning. And if you consider about thinking of whether this is feeling or versus the cause of the shame, it allows for you to be more open-minded to external feedback, and maybe even asking a non-judgmental friend or family or support structure, and giving you that opportunity to be more open-minded and freeing yourself of the guilt through reframing your thoughts of shame. And that then allows you to let go of, that self-destructive, that secrecy that you may be carrying with you, and then talking about it. That's just plain and simple. Open up about what's happening for you. I mean, a line that we use, I'm sure it's a common line, but share your shame and guilt because it dies on exposure. And it's so true. If you have a support system, much like the family support group that we have here, or any other support systems that support groups you might be going to, opening up about your experiences, about your feelings, relieves yourself of a weight. And the same goes for shame. Sometimes it helps to hear it said out loud, to realize what it was doing for you, to hold on to that shame. Because it could be that you might continue the cycle of shame because the shame is doing something for you. It's giving you permission to be a certain way. And this extends to your loved ones in treatment. And it's something that we say with them too, that why do you feel this need to hold on to the shame? What does it allow you to do? If you carry on through life as this person that is bad, this person that is a failure, this mother that is the worst, this father that is dreadful, what does that allow you to do? But as soon as you start speaking out loud what your shame is, it starts to fall away because now the power is no longer there. Okay. Moving on to...
Can I just add to that, Molly? I think sometimes us breaking up into 4 different sort of quarters can make it seem quite a simplistic process, but it's actually a process that really takes a lot of time and energy on your behalf because you're committed and dedicated to your journey. I always make this sort of example in terms of it being a mental exercise. Just the same way people go to the gym and they exercise, and after maybe a month, you might not see any difference, and you're working arms like no one's business. And then after 3 months, then you start seeing the results. I always make the example in terms of even with mental exercise, you can't start working at it within a month and expect to see results. At the end of the day, you have to be realistic. It takes time, it takes energy, it takes effort from your behalf, but most of all, the dedication and commitment to your journey. And I always also sort of make this exercise in terms of it being a conscious effort. With anything that has to do with sometimes subconscious, you have to actively practice it consciously. So, and I make this example, bear with me with some of my metaphors. When you're driving a car and you're a learner driver, you're very aware in terms of when you're driving on the road. You're doing your mirror blind spots, checking every turn, waiting, yielding. I'm not saying people don't do it now, but I'm just saying in terms of when you're a learner driver, you're very conscious about it and you put in the work, you put in the effort. And then as time goes on, it becomes so subconscious and it's programmed for you to think that way or to act that way. So now you don't even, mean, you're conscious, but you're subconscious about driving from home to Pick and Pay. You know, sometimes you're aware of it, but unaware of it because of the programming that you have done over the years of practicing driving. So just also to highlight that it's not a necessary straightforward path in terms of dealing with guilt and shame. It takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of effort, and actively identifying those triggers and negative automatic thoughts and challenging them. You know, looking at yourself, we always say in a bird's eye view, you know, holistically, so, you know, in terms of separating what's actually true and what's not true when you challenge these guilt and shame emotions or feelings or self-concept about self.
Yeah, it's so true. It is something that takes practice, and it's great when you and I can sit here together and put this beautiful presentation together where we're explaining, we're giving definitions. We've got, okay, here, this is how we undo all of the years of feeling the shame and guilt, but it's not as simple as that. And it's something that everyone needs to work on. It's not just about addiction in this sense. It's just a practice of everyday life for anyone.
And just to add my 2 cents as well, I think a lot of the time we're so hard on ourselves, and sometimes rightfully so, but at the same time, I think showing a little bit of compassion in terms of this particular journey in itself is very important. Because at the same time, and I go back to it's taking a lot of time and effort in terms of you've accumulated, sometimes when you talk about shame, you've accumulated all this programming since you were a child, and it's childhood experience that has led you to think a particular way about yourself. So it won't take 2 months or 3 months, you know, you rewriting a different script about yourself that it spent years accumulating. So when, like Lolly's saying, in terms of it sounds simplistic, but in reality, it's when you fall, you get back up on, and it's that dedication and commitment to yourself that helps you through sometimes.
Definitely. Okay, and going on to the last slide, Cheryl. Okay, so this is the references, and I wanted to just spend a little bit more time on this slide. It's not normal that one spends time on the reference slide, but at the bottom, if you'd like to have a listen or read of the 3 resources that I've put at the bottom. They focus specifically on shame and guilt, and yeah, the Brene Brown one I'm familiar with. The other 2, not so much, but I have read good reviews on them. Okay, and yeah, I think at this point we can take questions if there are any. Or Cheryl, if you have anything you'd like to add.
Thanks, ladies. Thanks, Lolly. Yeah, I think, you know what, for me, shame and guilt is the essence of addiction. It's what addiction is based on. We know in treatment how hard it is for us to help them with their guilt and their shame, because, like we said in the beginning, you know, it's an action versus a sense of self. And it's really difficult to convince them your action was a problem, but you are okay. You will be okay if you stay clean, make amends, you know, work the program, etc. But I think from the family's perspective, we became more aware of our guilt and shame long before. This was one of the first stages of the family disease. Where did we go wrong? What have we done wrong? And sure, I think every single one of us has done many things wrong, but it's about looking at it versus an action versus who are we as people and our personalities. So I think it was a beautiful presentation, and hopefully it's given our audience insight into what breeds guilt and shame, what we have to do with it, the length of time it takes to work on it, because it's not going to turn over after tonight in a stunning presentation. It's a lot of soul searching. It's a lot of deep inner work from our childhood, from our, if we're parents of addicts, that's a different set of shame. If we're siblings of addicts, we've got another set of shame. If we're married addicts, we have another set of shame. It all feels the same, but our denials are different.
Yeah.
So, I remember people saying to me, it's your brother, it's your sister. It's not the same as my child. And I'd say it actually is. We just have a different dialogue, and our thoughts, although are very similar, it pertains to the dynamic of that relationship. So hopefully everybody on the platform tonight can start doing some of their own work around their own guilt and shame, and then also having empathy that the addict loved ones are going through this. Dealing with guilt and shame is really difficult. It's for us as clinicians, but for them. They would rather than just cut it and run, go and use, drink it away, do anything to not avoid dealing with the guilt and the shame. And that's where how much of our work gets done. 80% of our treatment is dealing with the guilt and shame and holding them accountable that, yes, you've got these feelings, but your behavior has to be modified.
And I think you raised a valid point, and I'm a little bit irritated with myself that I didn't pick up on it, but I think I left out the denial component around guilt and shame, because it is so important. It's so important in the definition of them both, because everyone's denial looks different. And that's what formulates the narrative around my sense of guilt and my sense of shame. So I'm going to add that.
I think, of course, your denial is an issue, but I think the longevity of it was so important to raise.
Yes.
That it doesn't just come from having an addict in the family. It didn't cause the disease of addiction. It's one of the contributing factors. But each of us is responsible to deal with our own guilt and shame.
Yeah.
When we go to 12-step meetings as family members, we work the 12 steps for ourselves, not to keep them clean or not to help their recovery, but to help us deal with why did this happen in our family? And, how deep is our guilt? How deep is our shame? And I think, for a lot of families, maybe on this platform and people we work with daily, they feel guilty about enabling.
Yeah.
But they could do no difference. It felt right, but deep down they must have known that they weren't doing right.
Yeah.
And then when they get into treatment, they say, well, why did I give him money? And why did I let him have the card? Why did I send him to that school and that rehab? And, so it's such a long process.
Yes.
To deal with.
There's anyone that'd like to comment or ask a question? Open up the floor.
Okay, while we're waiting for families to ask questions or to share, I'd like to raise how we actually really treat the guilt and shame in treatment. The most powerful tool we have is the group therapy. A lot of families phone us and say, no, we don't want group therapy. We want individual therapy. And whilst individual therapy is crucial, the best way because therapists aren't going to share their own experience. So they're not going to relate, how did I treat my own guilt and shame? The power of group therapy, when they hear each other sharing their darkest, painful moments, and they think, wow, if he can survive that, so can I. And if he can share that or she can share that, then so can I. And that's why they develop close bonds in treatment and with their sponsors, because they realize that the disease of addiction made them do some crazy things. And who are they? I think you've really hits a nail on the head that everybody really struggles with, is that deep guilt that the families feel about, why did I do that? I should have, somebody spoke to me and I didn't. And I think the best way that we grow from that is accepting that we did the best we could with what we had. This disease is complicated. It's not a normal, recipe of how to bake a cake. It's so deep and entrenched and filled with denial and toxicity and lies and deception that we really do the best we can with the limited information. I think if you think back while you were giving birth, if somebody came to you with a manual and said, well, this is how to deal with your loved one in treatment in 2023, you would have laughed at them. You would have said, are you mad? That's not going to happen to me. And I think that stays with us because addiction is so shocking.
And it's gradual. It's not, it starts off seemingly small, but it builds and builds and builds. And you're like, okay, no, but it was just once. It was only just that. And then next thing you're sitting here 3 years later and you're like, how did I get here?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think also because we've dealt with such manipulative personalities and they've played on the mistakes we might have made or the errors or the codependency, and they almost enforce that shame. If you were a better mother, if you hadn't got divorced, if you'd sent me to a better school, if you hadn't been so controlling, if you did get a nice boyfriend, and that feeds it, and we take it on, and it's a case of I should have, would have, could have. Instead of saying, you know what, it is what it is, it's in the past, I have to deal with this, but what am I going to do going forward is my responsibility to deal with my own guilt and shame, and not theirs. It's ours. And that's what step 1 to 4 is of Al-Anon, Nor-Anon, and the family support 12-step meetings. They don't talk about our loved ones. They talk about us. We came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. We take a fearless moral inventory of our wrongs and admit it. So it is, our recovery is equally as important, and not to keep them clean, but to start addressing the toxicity in the family. I think Mel raised the word embarrassment. And I think it's so important to remind ourselves that we feel embarrassed. So you've got the guilt and the shame, and then the embarrassment of what will people think? How could I do that? How could this happen to me? We went to private school, we did this, we did that, we didn't have the opportunity to go to private school. But it's a reminder that drugs and addiction are great equalizers. It doesn't matter what we've done, where we've come from. If we came from the humblest of beginnings, or we struggled, or we were comfortable, doesn't matter. The disease is the same. It's democratic. It's confusing. It's based on guilt and shame. And recovery is the same. We've got to do the same amount of work in order to get better, and they've got to do the same amount of work to get better. But the key is talking. Shame does breed in that secret. And, NA and AA say we're sick as the secrets that we keep. And I think most of us for years didn't tell anybody there was something chronically wrong in our family. I used to joke with my family because my mother always used to tell family my brother was on a computer course. So people thought he was like the next Bill Gates, but he was in rehab over and over and over and over again. And when they started saying he's an addict, he's in rehab, they say, oh, we've also got that struggle. Where do you go for help? What do you do to get help? I think what we don't realize, especially for those of us that keep it all bottled up, people may not know exactly what we've gone through, but they see the worn out, drained, emotional, wrecked, not coming to work exhausted, on the phone. People see that, and they may not know what we're going through. And if I believe that if somebody says something, we can look inward and go, am I too soft? And is that something I've got to work on? And acknowledge, you know what? Yes, I've been through hell. I have walked through horrible, terrible, awful times for decades. Yes, I have been through hell. But if you don't mind, I'll share that with people that I'm working with right now.
Okay. I don't need the judgment.
We're powerless over what people think of us. And we're powerless over what people think of our loved ones who are addicts. People are gossipers. They gossip. They transfer. They look in their own garden, in your garden, before they tend to theirs. That's what letting go is about. It's about taking personal responsibility, working on ourselves, working on our own families, and let go of the rest.
It's a process.
Got enough of a battle, correct?